About 2 or 3 decades ago, a young friend of mine called me up on her landline to my landline. She was very upset. We didn't know it at the time, but her life had been kind of destroyed. And before we go on, put up the flashing lights here. This is a bit of a trigger warning. The things that messed up her life were psychological damage stuff. Many of you might not want to go further. So if you aren't up for this, please back away now. All right? That said, let's go on. So it turned out that a mutual contact of ours, I knew her from a volunteer group, a fellow volunteer, they got together. Now, both of them had relationships, but they were meeting on their own, alone, in his room. And after kissing for a while, he locked the door. He decided he was going to finish what they'd already started, except that all the way through it, she kept saying, I don't think we should be doing this. I get where you're coming from. The guy obviously thought, she's right. You both have relationships. You really shouldn't be doing this kind of thing that just adds sort of the spice and the flavor, doesn't it? Unless she provides a clear context for why you should be doing this or why you shouldn't be doing this. And eventually, once he'd finished, the police were called and they explained to her that he did nothing wrong. Now, this was before the Me Too, You Too movement. I feel reluctant to say Me Too because I'm sort of a tall white male. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say Me Too. You're welcome to leave comments down below. Know that boundaries are incredibly valuable. This poor girl had post-traumatic stress disorder, so it was a horrible trauma for her. She wasn't just saying, this feels uncomfortable like a wool sweater or something. It was something she genuinely did not want. After that, her boyfriend had to move on. A lot of her friends just had to dispose of them. Like myself, I was really upset. I knew the guy. I was young. I didn't know what to do. I thought, could I beat the guy up? How can I help her? And also for me, my personal involvement, she was somebody who'd come over to my place now and then. We'd hang out and she was a friend of mine. How did I feel about that? What did I think of this? How did I feel responsible? Yeah, it was a mess for everyone. And now it's your mess. This is a good time for you to experience what your boundaries are. This is something that's obviously either so far from your context you can scarcely imagine it, or it's something that is within your context and it's something you can barely contain. For a lot of you, really, really suggests how powerful boundaries are. So now that we have that at stake, I'm going to go through a number of people that I looked at trying to find an answer for this. There was this American doctor, speaks with a bit of a southern accent. He suggests that boundaries are a lot like property. And when somebody gets on your property, you should tell them where to go. That's a very, very simple concept, which is why it became so popular on the internet. The problem with that is it sounds like something a white male doctor in southern United States with right to carry might suggest. If you're carrying a shotgun and somebody comes on your property, you've got the solution right there in your hands. If you're anybody else, like my friend, it doesn't cut the mustard. She definitely recognized herself. She was a confident and beautiful girl. She recognized the value of herself, and she tried to say, hey, you're going over the property lines here. This is really not cool, dude. You can imagine, to some extent, she must have had conflict in herself. She could have said, well, you know what? I kind of started this. I went along with this. And a whole bunch of greasy, slimy, slippery slope type conditions probably went on in her mind as he continued to make things go wrong. We're going to say from this example, it doesn't cut it. That's just not going to cut it. Things. I looked at one of the most famous TED Talks to see if they could come up with boundaries for my poor friend. And she said, what was her name again? Sarri Gilman? My apologies if I'm saying it wrong. There's the spelling. This was a TED Talk 5 years ago. I think it predates the Me Too movement. Not sure. All those other movements. But she suggests 3 things. When you're supporting somebody else more, you should support yourself more. As you support others, you should support yourself more. So I guess in this situation, she's really supporting some guy and his needs. So she should be really supporting herself more. The second one she suggested was reach out. Now, this is really good advice. She says taking courses, getting therapy. People with experience can get you through these things. The problem with this is she was in no position to reach out. The only guy she could reach out for was already on top of her. That's just not cutting it again. Third one, focus on your responsibilities. Now, clearly the TED talker was talking about everyday, lighter, long-term responsibilities, which is why the boundaries are much more 200-mile fish zone as opposed to this is the line on my desk. You should not put your stuff over it. It's very, very vague boundaries. And so the solutions she gave were very, very vague as well. But hearkening back to the very beginning of this video, these things don't cut it. When somebody crosses over your boundaries and it hurts, it's too late. We can't go back and take a course and reach out to a friend, relative, or somebody who might have the answer. It's not a game show. The next person I reached out to was Miss McCabe. She does videos on how to ADHD. Jessica is wonderful. She's brutally smart. She's done TED Talks. She has over 1 million subscribers. I'll send her a copy of this video to see if I've crossed any of her boundaries. I love the irony in this entire video. Boundaries keep on. What she does is she compares your boundaries to resource caps. And she, of course, uses a framework of 4 different things that an ADHD person would have difficulty running out of. So she lists, for example, attention. ADHD, one of the big words in there is attention. And when we run out of attention, we're sunk. We can't function. Which is ironic because we actually have so much of it. She suggests that you manage these resources. And then she goes on to provide 6 tips for how to create positive and negative boundaries, and how you put the other person in a position to be able to say no, to be able to reject where you're going. So let me expand on this and let me clarify. This is very interesting. If you recognize that a boundary is your ability to say no, that means it's an answer to a question. What's the question? This gets into the concept of positive and negative freedoms. Freedom from and freedom to. This is why you're there in the first place. Getting back to the very, very beginning of this video, there was this person in a room. If she knew why she was there, she would be able to see when things were going wrong, because things would be going in a direction that she wouldn't care for. Let's just make a huge assumption that my friend was there in that room with that guy because she wanted intimacy, not sex. Intimacy like father and daughter, brother and sister, looking for snuggles. Maybe wanted a back massage. I don't know and I can't judge. But you see what happens there? She then sees the door lock and go, wait a minute. And then he would say, well, you were kissing a moment ago. And then she would say, that was already what I didn't want. And this is too far. And then he is welcome to say sexuality and intimacy are too tightly intertwined. And that negotiation, my friends, is what boundaries look like. It's not just a good idea. It's the only way. If you look at this boundary between intimacy and sexuality, that's a boundary in yourself. And that's only one of many. There are millions of things which look identical and are not even related. This freedom from and freedom to. Freedom from things that hurt you or bother you or annoy you or frustrate you. And these freedom to find things that you enjoy, that you savor, that make you happy, that make your life meaningful. These things, you need them both to move forward. There's a huge difference between loneliness and solace. There's a huge difference between relaxation and depression. A lot of these things can look absolutely identical. The way I would get there to understand these 2 very dynamic sets of yourself would be to do 10 minutes a day of journaling and make it active and dynamic journaling. I will do a video on this. Otherwise, you might find yourself saying, I did nothing today, or the clouds were very puffy. Don't get me wrong, those are still valid and valuable observations. But with a dynamic journaling process, you will take past versions of yourself and they will gang up on you. No, that's a terrible analogy. They will give you an idea of where you want to go. So that when you're in a situation which is difficult, troublesome, or dangerous, at least you can ask yourself, what am I doing here? And you'll know. And then at very least, you can reduce the damage. And at best, you can, in that situation, explain to that person what you're there for. And that person, instead of damaging you, could very well offer you what you wanted in the first place. Then everyone wins. This is the really cool thing. And let me close on this. This is the really cool thing about boundaries. It's done right. When you say no to something, they're glad you put it out there. They're thankful. And they should be, because a friend is thankful and glad to know what they're allowed to share with another friend. And if they're not your friend, I'm sorry, but they don't matter.